you everyone for being here. So imagine you're a single parent working multiple jobs. You're trying to provide for you and your family. You never had a chance to go to college, and your minimum wage jobs just aren't making ends meet. In this scenario, do you believe that a higher minimum wage would make things better? Would the ripple effects do more damage than help? What would those ripple effects be exactly? And finally, what would raising the minimum wage do for our country? Today, I'm going to inform you of the positive and negative effects of raising the minimum wage in America. I have done extensive research that has made me quite knowledgeable about this topic, and I plan to share with you what I have learned today. I will do this by informing you of the following 4 points. First, I will discuss the positive effects by establishing the fact that raising the minimum wage in our nation would increase economic activity and decrease our country's poverty rate. Then I will discuss some of the negative effects that would result from a higher federal minimum wage. Those negative effects include an increase in national unemployment levels and an increase in consumer good prices. There are many people in America who believe that raising the minimum wage would solve a lot of our nation's problems. My first point is that raising the minimum wage would result in an increase in economic activity in our country. First of all, raising minimum wage would not yield effects right away. There would be a natural phase-in period that would have to occur first. That means that our nation's economy wouldn't see any real changes for a while at the beginning. However, according to the Economic Policy Institute reporter David Cooper, after this phase-in period, our nation's GDP, or gross domestic product, would increase by about $22 billion. He also found that increase would result in the creation of roughly 85,000 net new jobs. Cooper provides this analysis based on his knowledge and his findings from the current minimum wage, which at the time this article was written in 2013 was $7.25, and minimum wage trends in our country's history and future projections of our economy based within the context of the Harkin-Miller proposal. It should be noted that our country's current minimum wage in 2016 is still $7.25. Cooper provides this overview of the economic effect that would result if our nation raised the federal minimum wage from to $10.10. According to a 2013 article by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, raising the federal minimum wage by $1.75 would increase the GDP by 0.3%. Though this is a small increase, it's still an increase. David Cooper even mentions this publication in his articles in notes by saying, "In our view, these assumptions are more extreme than we think warranted. Nevertheless, employing them would suggest that even under highly negative assumptions, increasing the minimum wage would still have a modest positive impact on the economy in short term." The second point I have for the positive effects is that raising the minimum wage would reduce the poverty in our country. With all of this economic growth that would result from a higher minimum wage, its effects are sure to trickle down to the individual level, right? That would mean that if our country is doing better economically, then Americans should also be receiving the economic benefits. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, our nation's poverty threshold for families as of 2015 falls between the yearly income of $12,000 and $25,000. To give some perspective, according to the whitehouse.gov, on average, a full-time minimum wage worker makes $14,500 a year. Our nation's poverty rate is at a low. However, according to a 2014 Congressional Budget Office report, if our country raised the minimum wage to just $9 an hour, 300,000 people would be lifted out of poverty. Finally, the Obama administration endorses the increases when it was stated on the website, whitehouse.gov, raising the minimum wage nationwide will increase earnings for millions of Americans and will support the local economies where they live, work, and spend their earnings. However, there are still others in our nation who believe that raising the minimum wage would just be a band-aid fix for a very real problem that in our country's economy. The third point that I have is that raising the minimum wage would raise employment levels in our country. Even though our nation might experience a few positive effects from raising the minimum wage, those effects would only be short-term. Unfortunately, it seems that the overall effects could be more negative than most people think. According to the Congressional Budget Office, in an opposing stance, although a higher pay would increase families' incomes and would cause those incomes to rise above the national poverty threshold, some jobs for low-wage workers would most likely be eliminated, and the incomes of those low-wage workers would also fall. Liberty University student and author of the article "Decision to Raise Minimum Wage is Not Worth It," Jacob Tellers, plainly says it this way: companies have two options in response to the extra cost of a minimum wage increase. In order to maintain their profits, they can either cut costs or increase revenues. Both of these options would be harmful to the economy. Cutting costs probably means either firing workers or not hiring as many new employees. Either way, it means fewer jobs. End quote. The last point I have is that raising the minimum wage would cause prices to rise everywhere. I feel that Jacob Teller says it best when he stated in his article, "A rise in wages seems good for workers until other effects are considered. If the minimum wage is increased, the money has to come from somewhere." End quote. And he is absolutely right. Raising the minimum wage would work at first, but then companies would either have to start firing employees or raising the prices of their own goods and services. According to the same 2013 article by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, it was discovered that if minimum wage was increased, restaurants would pass on 100% of their increased labor costs to consumers. And when other like businesses were asked, they said they would do the same. Finally, research in 2008 done by the Journal of Human Resources found that prices unambiguously increase in response to a minimum wage change. End quote. From this information, I hope that you will be able to make an informed decision of your own about your opinions on whether or not our nation should increase the federal minimum wage. By informing you that increasing the minimum wage would sponsor economic activity in our country, reduce the poverty threshold, cause employment rates to drop, and cause prices to rise, I hope you now understand the positive and negative effects of increasing the minimum wage in our country. So do you think that raising the minimum wage would fix our country's problems?